The wet tear of flesh echoed through the vaulted hall. Roman's jaw locked. His teeth sank into the curve of her neck, setting the mating mark. Not mine. My sister's. A single drop of blood hit the polished marble of the silver main pack hall. The crowd went entirely still. Hundreds of eyes flicked from the elevated dais to where I knelt on the lower steps. They were waiting for me to scream, expecting the hysterical collapse of a discarded mate. My hand drifted down to my stomach, pressing flat against the heavy silk of my dress. Beneath it, two tiny heartbeats fluttered. Twins. The heirs his bloodline demanded. If the pack discovered them without a father's protection, the culling laws would turn them into ash. I kept my mouth shut. Roman pulled back from my sister, his mouth stained and his chest heaving. He refused to look at me. The great Alpha King, terrified of a quiet woman. I stood up. The pack parted for me. I turned my back on the throne and walked away. My heels clicked against the marble, echoing loudly as I left my rank and the man who had hollowed me out. No one stopped me as I pushed open the heavy oak doors. The bitter night air hit my face, smelling of pine and coming snow. The sound of my footsteps faded into the relentless wind of the wastes. Wind hammered the iron walls of Obsidian Keep. 7 years had passed. Below the upper balcony, the courtyard smelled of rendered fat and hot iron. The rhythmic clang of the blacksmiths hammered out a steady heartbeat of industry. It was a thriving sanctuary carved from the unforgiving stone of the wastes. My sanctuary. A massive feral rogue thrashed against heavy chains held by 2 of my border guards. Blood coated his chin and dripped onto the packed dirt. I don't answer to a bitch without a crown. The rogue's voice rattled the wooden scaffolds. I claim this territory by the old laws. I didn't shout back. I just looked down. To my right, standing in the shadows of the doorway, my 2 children remained perfectly still. They watched the violence below with unnerving calm. They did not flinch because I did not flinch. I walked down the metal stairs, my boots ringing sharp over his frantic snarling. The courtyard went quiet. Even the blacksmith stopped mid-swing. I stopped a few feet from the chained wolf. He was twice my size and desperate to establish dominance in a world that had forgotten him. The old laws died at the border, I told him, keeping my voice flat. This is my stone. You will breathe my air only if I allow it. You're nothing, he spat, though his chest heaved with uncertainty. No mark. No alpha. You have no right. I built the walls you're standing behind. I didn't raise a hand or bare my teeth. I just let the silence stretch until his panic broke. Slowly the rogue lowered his head. His knees hit the dirt. I turned away, dismissing him. Before my boot reached the first step, a solitary horn blasted from the southern watchtower. A long bone-rattling note. The hammering did not resume. Every head in the courtyard snapped toward the massive iron gates. The wind shifted, bringing the heavy scent of ozone, dark pine and ancient frost. Something was coming. The southern gates groaned under the strain of the freezing wind. I stood on the catwalk looking down at the solitary figure waiting in the snow. He was huge. Kaelen of the northern steppes. The mythic Lycan, the monster they used to frighten rogue pups into obedience. Open the gates. His baritone voice vibrated through the iron beneath my boots. No. He stepped forward, shadows thickening around his broad shoulders. I am not asking, Sovereign. You are standing outside my walls, I said, gripping the icy rail. That means you are asking. A low vibration started in his chest. It wasn't just a growl. It was a physical force that made my guards grip their weapons tighter. Kept my breathing even. His head snapped up. His eyes darkened as the beast fought to surface. A deformed shadow of fur and bone rippled beneath his skin. He let out a roar that shattered the frost on the gate's hinges. I stared down at him. I did not blink or step back. His monstrous energy battered against the stone, searching for fear. It found nothing. Slowly, the mindless fury receded from his face, replaced by something far more dangerous. He looked fascinated. Your terms, he finally said. A formal treaty. Weapons surrendered. You walk in as a guest, not a king. And if I refuse? Then you freeze. He wiped a line of blood from his nose, his pale eyes never leaving mine. The corners of his mouth twitched into a ruined smile. Open the gate, Queen. The rusted iron shrieked as the winch turned. Kaelen eclipsed the courtyard lanterns as he stepped through the threshold. He smelled of crushed pine needles and fresh blood. My guards tightened their grips on their spears. I stood at the base of the stairs waiting. He stopped 5 paces away, dominating the space. "Weapons," I said quietly. He stared down at me. For a second the beast pushed against the back of his eyes, wanting to rip the gates off their hinges. I held his gaze, letting him feel the weight of my authority. Slowly, Kaelen unbuckled the massive bruised iron broadsword from his back and let it drop. It hit the frozen dirt with a heavy thud. He unlaced the dagger at his thigh. It joined the sword. He took a step closer, entirely unarmed now, yet infinitely more dangerous. "I am unarmed, Queen. Step into the light." He did. The lantern fire caught his scarred, exhausted face. A sound started deep in his chest. My guards braced for a roar, and I prepared to drop the magical ward hidden beneath my tongue. But it wasn't a growl. It was a heavy, vibrating hum that rattled the loose pebbles at my boots. A purr. The Lycan King's cursed beast was vibrating with deep territorial contentment. Kaelen froze, his face registering absolute shock. He looked at me as if I had just ripped his chest open, then took a step back, yielding the space. The heavy oak door to my private wing clicked shut. I leaned my forehead against the wood, my hands shaking. I walked to the wash basin and plunged them into the freezing water to anchor my racing pulse. "Mama." I turned. My twins sat on the woven rug near the hearth, playing quietly with carved wooden blocks. They watched the world with an unnerving stillness. I crossed the room and pulled them against my chest. They smelled of milk and wood smoke. A shift in the draft made the hairs on my arms stand up. I didn't reach for a blade. Kaelen stood in the open archway of the hall. He made no sound. He didn't cross the threshold, he was simply looking at the twins. The firelight illuminated my children's faces as they turned to look at the massive stranger. The light caught their eyes, revealing pure, liquid silver. The highly guarded royal trait of the Silvermane bloodline. Their execution warrant. My magic flared, sharp and violent, pooling in my palms. If he spoke the Alpha's name, I would tear the air from his lungs. Kaelen looked at their silver eyes, then at my glowing hands, taking in my fierce defensive posture. He didn't smile or ask questions. He simply bowed his head in a deliberate show of respect, stepped backward into the dark hallway and pulled the door shut. The charcoal snapped in my grip. The map room smelled of burning wax and old parchment. I stared at the tactical layout of the eastern corridor, but my mind was stuck on Kaelen's face. The heavy iron door slammed open. Gale, my lead border scout, stumbled into the room. His leathers were scorched and dark blood dripped from his left shoulder. I dropped the broken charcoal. "Speak." Gale collapsed against the war table, coughing. "The Eastern Trading Post. It's gone. Rogues. Uniforms." Gale gripped the edge of the wood, his knuckles white. "A vanguard. They burned the market to the ground. Silvermane. What were they looking for?" I demanded. "They weren't looking for grain," Gale coughed. His eyes were wide with a terror I had never seen in him. "They asked for you by your old name. They asked for Sloane. My true name. Buried under 7 years of ice. And they asked about the rumor. A merchant sold it to them. They know about the cubs with the silver eyes." The floor felt unstable. My meticulously built walls suddenly felt like paper. A shadow moved in the corner of the room. Kaelen stepped out of the darkness. He walked directly toward me, placing his massive frame between me and the open door like a shield wall. "Where is the vanguard now?" Kaelen's voice lacked humanity. "Roman is crossing the ice," Gale choked out. "And he brought the blood witches with him." The heavy iron breastplate was freezing against my collarbone. I didn't flinch as my handmaid pulled the leather straps tight across my ribs. 7 years ago I wore silk and knelt on marble. Today I wore boiled leather and blackened steel. Roman was here. The man who had erased me was crossing my ice. The scent of ozone and crushed pine was thick. Kaelen had not left my side since Gale collapsed. He simply anchored himself to my perimeter, waiting for a command. "You don't have to stand there," I told his reflection in the mirror as the final strap was secured. "Yes, I do." I turned to face him. He leaned against the stone wall, his arms crossed. "He is an Alpha King," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "He travels with 50 wolves. If he sees you standing behind me, he will assume I am weak. He will assume you rule here. Kaelen pushed off the wall and crossed the room in 2 strides. He stopped inches away, radiating unnatural heat. He reached out, his calloused fingers brushing a stray curl back from my shoulder plate. Let him assume whatever he wants, Sloane, Kaelen murmured. When I rip the throat out of his vanguard, he'll know exactly who holds my leash. He stepped back into the shadows just as the horn blasted from the northern watchtower. Roman had arrived. They expected a camp of starving rogues shivering around a fire. Instead, the silver mane vanguard stepped into a fortress. I sat on a throne carved from solid obsidian at the top of a 12-step dais. I was elevated and untouchable. Roman strode through the doors, flanked by his elite guard. He wore the spotless ceremonial white furs of the silver mane. He still had the sharp jaw and arrogant eyes of a man who believed the world existed for his consumption. He didn't look at the armed rogue soldiers lining the walls. He looked at me. Roman froze. His boots stopped dead on the polished stone floor. The color drained from his face and his elite guard quieted instantly. Sloane. He breathed my name like a prayer he didn't believe in. I kept my hands resting loosely on the stone arms of my throne. You. Roman stammered, his polished veneer cracking. His eyes darted frantically around the massive hall. This is yours. Delayed vindication hit my veins like a drug. You are standing on my stone, Alpha, I said, my voice carrying perfectly in the hall. State your business or leave my ice. Roman swallowed hard, his chest puffing out as he desperately tried to claw back his authority. He took a step forward, preparing to demand answers. You will approach the throne when you speak to the queen. The voice came from the deep darkness to the right of the dais. Roman's head snapped toward the shadow. His guards drew their swords, the steel ringing off the walls. Kaelen stepped into the light. He didn't wear armor. The mythic Lycan paralyzed every silver mane wolf in the room just by existing. They recognized the legends. Walk up the steps, Kaelen commanded, locking eyes with Roman. Or I will break your legs and drag you up them. Roman's face flushed red. He looked at Kaelen, then up at me. The Alpha King of the Silver Mane was being forced to climb. Gritting his teeth, Roman took a step. The metal stairs clanged under his reluctant boots. He stopped on the 3rd step from the top. I didn't come for a territory dispute, Roman spat, though his voice lacked thunder. I came for my property. My blood turned to ice. I heard the rumors, Roman sneered, leaning in closer. Silver eyes in the wastes. You took something from me, Sloane. My bloodline. You have no heirs here, I said, keeping my voice hollow. Don't lie to me. Roman snarled, lunging forward to grab my arm. He never made it. Kaelen moved in a blur of unnatural speed. A massive hand clamped around Roman's throat, lifting the Alpha King clean off the iron steps. Roman choked, his boots dangling in the air. The silver mane guards surged forward. Hold. I commanded. My guards leveled their crossbows. Kaelen didn't look at the screaming guards. He looked at me, waiting. Drop him, I said. Kaelen opened his hand. Roman hit the iron steps hard, coughing and gasping for air. You have no property here, Roman, I said, staring down at him. Take your vanguard. Walk out of my gates. Never return. Roman scrambled to his feet and retreated down the steps backwards, his eyes wild with fury. You think this changes anything? He hissed, pointing a trembling finger at me, then at Kaelen. You think you can hide my cubs behind a monster? The culling laws demand purity. They belong to the pack. They belong to me, I stated with absolute finality. Roman laughed, a jagged, desperate sound. You always were naive, Sloane. He turned his back and marched toward the oak doors. I watched them leave, the heavy doors slamming shut behind them. I closed my eyes and let out a long breath. We had won. He's not leaving the territory. My eyes snapped open. Kaelen was staring at the closed doors. What? I asked. His scent, Kaelen murmured. He wasn't carrying fear when he left. He was carrying anticipation. A sickening lurch hit the pit of my stomach. Before I could issue an order, the iron doors burst open again. One of my inner sanctum nurses collapsed onto the stone, sobbing hysterically, her apron stained with dark blood. Pie Queen, she screamed. The eastern wing. The wards just collapsed from the inside. The eastern wing, where the twins were sleeping. He didn't come to negotiate, Kaelen roared, pulling his broadsword from his back in one fluid motion. He came to create a distraction. I was moving before the nurse's knees hit the floor. I vaulted the lower steps of the dais, my boots slipping on the slick marble. Secure the perimeter. I screamed to the hall guard. No one leaves the keep. I tore down the main corridor. The torches lining the walls flickered, their flames turning a sickly chemical green. The air smelled of rotting copper and dead earth. It was the rancid stench of dark blood magic. Roman had brought the disgraced witches of the Southern Coven. A massive shadow fell in beside me. Kaelen didn't ask for a map. He ran with terrifying silence, his broadsword gripped in his fist. We rounded the corner into the eastern wing and found 3 of my elite guards on the floor. I skidded to a halt. The air was thick with a crimson haze. They hadn't been slashed. The blood magic had simply boiled the iron in their veins. Don't breathe it in, Kaelen commanded. He stepped in front of me, blocking my view. My children are at the end of this hall, I breathed. My magic flared, casting a blue light against the stone. I know. Kaelen's grip on his sword tightened. Stay behind me. The heavy oak door to the nursery was gone. It had been dissolved into splinters of blackened wood that smoked in the freezing air. I surged forward, but Kaelen threw his arm across my chest, pinning me to the stone wall outside the frame. Inside the nursery, 3 figures in white cloaks stood in a triangle around the center of the room. Blood witches. Their hands were raised as they chanted. In the center of their triangle, a sphere of blue light pulsed frantically. My inner ward. Through the magic I could see the twins sitting on their rug staring out at the witches. The blue sphere flickered. A hairline crack appeared. Panic clawed up my throat. I pushed off the wall, ready to burn my own sanctuary to the ground to save them. Kaelen moved faster. He dropped his broadsword. It hit the floor with a deafening clang. Kaelen, what? He didn't answer. You couldn't fight blood magic with steel. He stepped into the doorway, walking directly into the crimson haze. I am no king here, Kaelen roared, his voice stripping away its humanity. I am her wall. He charged the witches barehanded. The lead witch turned in shock as the massive Lycan closed the distance. She thrust her hands forward and a whip of solidified dark blood lashed out, wrapping around Kaelen's chest. The magic hissed as it burned through his tunic and cut into his muscle. Kaelen didn't even slow down. He grabbed the blood whip with his bare hand. The magic blistered his palm to the bone, but he yanked. The witch flew forward. Kaelen's other hand closed around her throat. A sickening snap echoed over the chanting and the red mist in the room convulsed. The remaining 2 witches panicked, abandoning my ward to focus their magic on the monster tearing apart their coven. Crimson tendrils pierced Kaelen's shoulder, his thigh, his back. Dark blood spattered across the wooden floorboards. Kaelen! I screamed. I threw my hands forward. A shock wave of blue kinetic energy blasted into the room, crushing the second witch against the stone wall. Kaelen took the third. He absorbed 3 more strikes from the blood whips just to get close enough to tear the witch apart. The chanting stopped. The crimson haze evaporated into the cracks of the wood. Silence slammed back into the room. My blue ward flickered one final time and vanished. The twins were untouched. Kaelen stood with his back to me. His tunic was shredded and deep lacerations covered his torso. The stench of burned blood was overwhelming. He had taken the hits meant for my children. I stepped into the room, my heart hammering. Kaelen, I breathed. He dropped to his knees. The heavy thud shook the floorboards. He slammed his uninjured hand against the wood, bracing himself. Stay back, he choked out. I took another step. Let me heal you. Sloane, stay back. He whipped his head around to look at me. I froze. The veins in his neck pulsed with thick, inky darkness. The dark blood magic had seeped into his open wounds, mixing with his ancient curse. His face shifted as the feral beast clawed its way to the surface. He let out a blood-curdling roar, his massive claws gouging deep into the floorboards as he prepared to lunge. Kaelen lunged like an unstoppable mass of violence, aimed directly at the corner where my children sat. I didn't summon a shield. I threw myself directly into his path. The physical impact knocked the breath from my lungs. We slammed into the stone wall, his claws gouging the stone on either side of my head. His jaw snapped open inches from my face. He was going to tear my throat out. I reached up and slammed my bare hands on either side of his mutating face. "Look at me," I commanded. I pushed every ounce of my authority into his eyes. "I am the queen of this stone. And you do not hunt in my house." The beast thrashed. The dark magic in his veins blistered my skin, but I refused to let go. "Recognize me," I demanded. The chaotic violence in his eyes met my unyielding posture. Slowly the black began to recede. The thick veins on his neck flattened, leaving a broken, bleeding man pinned against me. Kaelen's knees buckled. He dropped his forehead to my shoulder, trembling uncontrollably. The corridor erupted with the sound of armored boots. Gale and 6 guards flooded through the doorway, their weapons drawn, stopping dead at the sight of the slaughtered witches and the blood-soaked Lycan collapsing against me. "Pie Queen!" Gale shouted. "Stop," I ordered, holding up a bloody hand. I kept my arm around Kaelen's waist, absorbing his weight. He was semi-conscious, burning with toxic fever. "Get the children," I commanded my captain. "Take them to the inner vault. Lock the iron door. Do not open it for anyone but me." Gale nodded, scooping both twins into his arms. They stared at Kaelen as they were carried away. "Bring the medics for the king," another guard yelled. "No." The word cracked like a whip. "No medics. No one touches him. If my people saw the dark magic poisoning his blood, the alliance would shatter. They would see him as a monster." "Clear the hall," I ordered, shifting my grip on his tunic. "I am taking him to my chambers." Gale hesitated. "He's too heavy for you, Sloane." "Clear the hall," I repeated. They parted and I dragged the Lycan King through the corridors entirely alone. The fire in my hearth popped loudly in the quiet room. Kaelen sat on the edge of my heavy oak bed, stripped to the waist. His body was a map of old scars, now overlaid with the blackening lacerations from the blood witches. I stood between his knees, dipping a clean linen cloth into a basin of magically infused water. "This will burn," I murmured. "Do it," he rasped. I pressed the hot cloth into his collarbone. Kaelen's entire body went rigid, but he didn't make a sound. The corrupted blood hissed as my magic chased the poison out of his flesh. We stayed like that for an hour in heavy silence. I rinsed the cloth. The water in the basin was turning black. "You should have let the guards lock me in the lower cells," Kaelen said, his gaze fixed on the floorboards. The shame rolling off him was palpable. "You were infected by a curse, Kaelen. I almost killed them." His voice broke. "The beast just saw prey. I am exactly what they say I am." I dropped the cloth and placed my hand firmly over his heart. "Look at me." He didn't move. "Look at me, Kaelen." Reluctantly, he raised his head. His pale eyes were raw. He expected disgust. "You didn't kill them," I said quietly. "You threw yourself into a blood magic vortex barehanded. You let them tear your flesh apart to keep my ward intact. I spent 7 years building a wall so high no one could hurt me again. Tonight you were my wall." Kaelen stared at me. The self-loathing in his eyes was replaced by blinding heat. His restraint finally snapped. His massive hands gripped my waist. He didn't pull me down, he buried his face against my stomach, exhaling a shuddering breath. I ran my fingers through his damp hair. He stood up, framing my face with his scarred hands. He wasn't asking for permission. He was offering complete devotion. I grabbed his shredded tunic and pulled him down. The kiss tasted of ozone, copper, and relief. Kaelen backed me toward the heavy oak dresser. He kissed me like a starving man, breathless and rough. His mouth moved to my jaw. "Mine," a voice whispered. I froze. The voice didn't come from Kaelen. It echoed inside my bones, cold, arrogant, and slippery. "Roman." The temperature in my chambers plummeted and the fire snuffed out. Kaelen jerked back. "Sloane? What is it?" A sickening ice flooded my veins. I felt a violent tear in the psychic bond connecting me to my children. "Mama." The small, terrified voice echoed in my mind, layered beneath Roman's cruel laughter. He hadn't breached the inner vault. He had bypassed the stone entirely and walked into my son's head. The psychic tear felt like a blade sliding between my ribs. I gasped, staggering backward against the dresser. "Sloane." Kaelen's hands were instantly on my shoulders. Where are they? The vault, I whispered. He used the witches to establish a tether. I ran. I tore through the darkened corridors, my boots slipping on the stone. I rounded the final corner to the inner sanctum to find Gale and the elite guard pounding their gauntlets against the massive reinforced door of the vault. Step aside. I screamed, kinetic energy pooling in my palms. We can't open it, Queen. Gale yelled. We turned the deadbolts on the outside, but someone threw the heavy latch from the inside. There's no one inside but the twins, I breathed. I know. Gale's eyes were wide with terror. And they aren't answering. I slammed both palms flat against the freezing iron, pushing my magic into the metal to shatter the tumblers. The iron bit back. A shockwave of crimson magic violently repelled my hands, throwing me backward into the opposite wall. The door was sealed with blood magic. Kaelen caught me before I slid to the floor. He stepped up to the vault door, wedging his scarred fingers into the gap between the iron and the stone frame. A low growl started in his chest as he tried to rip the solid iron door off its hinges using raw strength. The metal groaned, but the crimson magic flared, sizzling against his flesh. Stop. I grabbed his arm. It's feeding on the resistance. You can't break it with force. He dropped his hands, chest heaving. I stepped back to the door and pressed my ear against the freezing metal. Mama. The voice was faint. My son. I'm here, I choked out, tears finally breaking free. I was just a mother pressing her face against a locked door. Open the latch, sweetheart. Just lift the heavy iron bar. I can't. The voice shifted. The pitch dropped, taking on a slow, arrogant drawl that made my blood run cold. He really can't, Sloane. Roman was speaking through my son's mouth. My knees gave out. I hit the stone floor, clawing at the bottom edge of the door. Get out of him, I whispered, the tears spilling hot and fast down my face. Roman, please. I'll give you the territory. I'll give you the trade routes. Just get out. A soft, mocking laugh echoed through the metal. You think I care about this frozen rock? Roman's voice filtered through my little boy's vocal cords. They are my property. But I am a reasonable king. The red magic pulsing around the doorframe deepened. The Lycan, Roman commanded. I want the monster. He humiliated me. I looked up. Kaelen was standing above me, perfectly still. Bring him to the southern gates, Roman continued. Put him in iron chains. Kneel in the dirt, Sloane. Both of you. Surrender the beast, and I will release the tether on my heir's mind. And if I refuse? I asked. The eastern balcony in the vault is quite high, Roman mused softly. It would be a tragedy if the boy decided to go for a walk in his sleep. The threat hung in the air. You have until dawn, Sloane. The crimson glow faded to a dull hum, leaving the heavy iron locking mechanism engaged. The silence in the corridor was heavy. Gale and the guards stared at the floor. I stayed on my knees, crushed by the impossible choice. Give Kaelen to Roman and he would be slaughtered. Refuse and Roman would march my son off the edge of the keep. Heavy boots stepped into my line of sight. Kaelen knelt in front of me and grabbed my arms, pulling me up until we were eye level. We don't negotiate, Kaelen stated flatly. He'll kill him, Kaelen, I sobbed. I can't break the magic. It's too dark. You can't, Kaelen agreed, his pale eyes burning. Kinetic magic respects the laws of physics. Blood magic bends them. To break it you don't need a spell, Sloane. He leaned in closer. You need a nightmare. My breath hitched. What are you saying? I can shatter the psychic tether, Kaelen murmured. If I completely drop the human confinement, my aura will incinerate the blood magic holding that door and the boy's mind. If you drop the confinement, I whispered, you'll go feral. You'll slaughter everyone in this keep. Kaelen didn't blink. The black was already pooling rapidly in his eyes. I will, he rumbled. Unless you hold my leash. He grabbed my hand and pressed it flat against his heart. Anchor me, Queen. Or we all die. His heart didn't beat, it hammered erratically. The heat radiating through his tunic was blistering. Don't look away, Kaelen commanded, his voice splitting into 2 octaves. No matter what I look like. Do not look away. I have you, I whispered. He closed his eyes and let go of the iron discipline that had kept him sane for 30 years. His bones cracked and shifted. His shoulders broadened, ripping his tunic to shreds as thick fur erupted along his spine. Gale and the guards scrambled backward in terror. I kept my hand pressed flat against his expanding chest. Kaelen's head snapped back. The roar that tore from his throat blew out the torches in the corridor, plunging us into darkness lit only by the crimson glow of the door. The mythic Lycan opened his eyes. There was no white, only a fathomless black void. The beast looked down at me, failing to recognize my face. It bared fangs the size of iron spikes and growled. I pushed my aura forward. The command wasn't spoken. I pushed it directly into his mind. The beast froze. It inhaled the scent of my skin and magic. The violence in its eyes faltered, replaced by absolute obsession. It had found its anchor. I pointed at the warded iron door. Break it. The beast slammed its massive shoulder into the solid iron. The reinforced metal buckled inward with an agonizing shriek. The crimson blood magic flared, trying to burn the Lycan. The beast absorbed the burns. Snarling, it dug its razored claws into the molten gap between the door and the frame. The muscles in its back coiled, and with a roar the beast ripped the solid iron door entirely off its hinges. The heavy metal slab crashed into the far wall of the vault. I stepped into the vault, the beast looming over my shoulder. My son stood on the edge of the stone balcony. The freezing wind whipped his sleep shirt around his knees. He turned to face us, his eyes glowing infected red. "You brought a dog to a siege," Roman sneered from my child's mouth. But the arrogance was thin, stretched tight over sudden panic. "Take him," I commanded the beast. The Lycan lunged. "I'll snap his neck." Roman screamed, throwing the boy toward the edge of the balcony. The beast was faster. As Kaelen crossed the room, the feral magic of his curse violently expanded. It slammed into my son as a psychic incinerator. Roman's blood magic detonated. A high-pitched scream ripped through the vault, Roman's psychic echo burning alive inside the tether. The dark magic evaporated into ash and my son collapsed. The beast caught him before he hit the stone, cradling his fragile body in a massive claw. The vault was dead silent. My daughter crept out from beneath the bed frame and ran to me, burying her face in my armor. I held her tight, keeping my eyes locked on the center of the room. The blood magic was gone, but Kaelen was still entirely feral. The monster turned its head, fixing its black eyes on me. It lowered my unconscious son gently to the rug, then stood to its full height. The bloodlust hadn't faded. It took a slow, heavy step toward me. "Queen," Gale whispered from the corridor, pulling back a crossbow string. "Drop the weapon, Gale," I ordered. "It's going to kill you, Sloane." I said drop it. The crossbow hit the floor. I let go of my daughter. "Stay behind me." I stepped toward the Lycan, leaving my throat exposed. The beast snapped its jaws inches from my face. I reached out and placed my bare palm flat against its blood-soaked chest. "I am here," I whispered. "Come back to me." The beast froze. It let out a confused whimper and pressed its forehead against my collarbone. I wrapped my arms around the thick neck of the monster, holding him exactly as I held my children. Bones cracked and shifted again. I sank to my knees on the floor, absorbing his weight as the monstrous geometry dissolved. The freezing wind howled through the balcony doors. Kaelen knelt on the rug, human once more. He was gasping for air, his skin coated in sweat and ash. He buried his face in my neck, gripping my breastplate. "I didn't hurt them," he choked out, his voice breaking into a sob. The immense fear he had carried his entire life finally broke apart. "You saved them," I whispered fiercely, pressing a kiss to his damp hair. I looked over his shoulder. My son was sitting up, rubbing his eyes. They were pure, unclouded silver. "Mama?" My head hurts. A terrifying clarity settled over me. The ice that had protected my heart was gone, replaced by sovereign rage. I looked down at Kaelen. As he read the shift in my expression, the lethal king of the northern steppes returned. "The tether broke," Kaelen rasped. The psychic backlash would have hit Roman the moment the magic incinerated. "He's injured," I said. "He's bleeding in the snow," Kaelen confirmed. "His vanguard is exposed." I stood up. I felt entirely weightless. "Gale," I called out. My captain stepped tentatively into the ruined doorway. "Secure the children in my chambers. Then sound the war horns. Wake the barracks. Saddle the heavy cavalry." We are holding the perimeter, Queen? Gale asked. No, I said, turning to look out into the howling darkness of the Obsidian Wastes. We aren't hiding behind stone anymore. I looked back at Kaelen. He was already rising to his feet, a dark smile curving his scarred lips. We are going hunting. The heavy iron gates of Obsidian Keep shattered the silence of the wasteland. I rode out first. The freezing wind tore at my cloak, but the cold didn't register. Behind me, 100 armored rogue cavalry rode in perfect formation. Kaelen rode at my right flank in black leathers, his broadsword strapped to his back. He handled a temperamental destrier that terrified my stablemen, watching my profile as a silent shadow. We are close, Kaelen's voice carried over the hooves. I can smell the ash. We crested the frozen ridge. The Silver Mane vanguard was a panicked mess of scattered tents. The elite guards stood in a loose circle, not looking outward, but looking down at the man bleeding into the snow. I didn't order a charge. I raised a single armored fist and the cavalry ground to a synchronized halt. The Silver Mane guards looked up. When they saw the armored riders and the mythic Lycan sitting perfectly still beside me, their remaining morale evaporated. Blades slowly lowered. I nudged my horse forward, riding down the embankment. Kaelen matched my pace. The vanguard parted. They didn't raise a single sword to stop me. Roman was on his knees. His pristine white furs were soaked in dark blood pouring from his nose, ears and eyes. He gasped for air, clutching his head. I brought my horse to a stop mere feet away. Roman slowly lifted his head. The arrogant spark in his eyes was drowned in pain. He looked at me, a twisted smile cracking his face. Sloane, he choked out, spitting blackened blood onto the snow. You came. He actually believed I had ridden out into the storm to save him, to negotiate now that my walls had been tested. I didn't dismount. You brought a curse into my child's mind, I said quietly. Roman's smile faltered. He looked past me to Kaelen and terror washed over him. He tried to stand, but his knees buckled violently, collapsing him back into the snow. I am your king, Roman gasped, looking desperately at his guards. Kill them. Defend your alpha. Not a single Silver Mane guard moved. They looked at Roman, then at my rogue army. They don't belong to you anymore, Roman, I said. Then do it, Roman sneered, ripping open his collar to bare his neck. Shift. Tear my throat out. Let them see what a monster you've become. He wanted an execution. It would mean he was a threat worthy of my violence. I looked down at the man who had cast me into the wilderness and nearly murdered my son. The rage in my chest crystallized into indifference. No. Roman froze. What? You aren't worth the blood on my steel, I stated flatly. You are just a parasite that ran out of hosts. I looked up, addressing the Silver Mane vanguard directly. Your alpha broke the old laws. He engaged in blood magic. Any man who wishes to return to the Silver Mane territory may leave now. Any man who stays beside him will freeze. The elite guard hesitated for exactly 3 seconds. Then the captain of the vanguard sheathed his sword, turned his back and began the long walk south. One by one the rest followed. Wait! Roman screamed hysterically. You can't leave me. They didn't look back. Roman clawed at the snow, trying to drag himself after them. He turned back to me, eyes wide with the realization that his ultimate punishment was absolute irrelevance. Sloane, please, he whimpered. I didn't answer. I pulled on the reins, turning my horse away from him and left him in the snow. The storm had broken by the time we reached the upper balconies of Obsidian Keep. The morning sun cast a brilliant light across the frozen wasteland. The sanctuary below was alive with the rhythmic hammering of the blacksmiths. I stood at the railing of the iron balcony in my blackened steel breastplate, soot still on my face. Kaelen stepped out behind me, wrapping me in the familiar heat of his presence. Far below, barely a speck against the white wastes, a solitary figure stumbled aimlessly toward the horizon. I turned away from the wastes, looking up at Kaelen. He reached out and placed his calloused hand flat against the small of my back. The trade routes are secure, Kaelen rumbled, locking his pale eyes onto mine. The north is yours if you want it. I don't need the north, I murmured. I already have my anchor. Kaelen's breath hitched. He reached up, his fingers brushing the soot from my cheekbone. You were never a discarded mate, Sloane, he whispered. You were just waiting for a monster strong enough to hold your crown. He leaned down, his lips brushing against mine. But as the physical reality of the mating bond locked into my chest, connecting our magic to his cursed blood, a deafening crack echoed from the sky above us. I broke the kiss, looking up as the blue morning sky tore open, bleeding brilliant silver light over the entire sanctuary. Kaelen's beast roared in my mind, not in anger but in shock. The bond hadn't just connected our souls. It had awakened something ancient sleeping beneath the ice, and the ground beneath the keep began to violently shake.